The hushed whispers of cadets in crisp uniforms filled the auditorium of the Air Force Academy as Lieutenant General Marcus Reynolds strode across the stage. His presence commanded attention without effort. Decades of service etched into the lines of his face, his chest adorned with ribbons and medals that told stories of wars fought across continents. But it was his eyes that Lieutenant Olivia Reeves noticed most, sharp and evaluative, missing nothing as they swept across the graduating class of 2025. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Olivia sat ramrod straight in the third row, her uniform perfectly pressed, her blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun so tight it gave her a headache. 4 years of grueling academic and physical training had led to this moment. Distinguished graduate, top of her class in aerospace engineering, and recipient of the prestigious Mitchell Award. Yet, despite her accomplishments, a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach as General Reynolds approached the podium. Distinguished guests, faculty, family members, and graduating cadets. Reynolds began, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from commanding troops in combat zones rather than behind a desk. Today marks not just the culmination of your training, but the beginning of your true service. Olivia had heard versions of this speech before: duty, honor, country, the pillars of military service recited like a familiar prayer. But something in Reynolds' delivery made the words feel newly minted, as if he were speaking directly to her. "You've been tested in classrooms and on training fields," Reynolds continued, his gaze moving systematically across the faces before him. "But the true test comes when theory meets reality, when textbook scenarios give way to the chaos of the real world." As he spoke, Olivia's eyes drifted to the audience where her father sat in his wheelchair, Master Sergeant James Reeves, retired. His dress blues still fit perfectly, despite the years since his active service, his posture military straight despite the empty space below his right knee. The ceremonial sword across his lap gleamed under the auditorium lights. A family heirloom passed down through 3 generations of Reeves who had served in America's armed forces. "Leadership isn't about the insignia on your shoulders," Reynolds was saying. "It's about the weight you're willing to carry for those under your command." Olivia returned her attention to the general, but noticed something had changed. Reynolds had faltered, almost imperceptibly, his rhythm broken by something that had caught his eye. Following his gaze, she realized he was looking directly at her father. "True leadership," Reynolds continued after the briefest pause, "is demonstrated when plans fail, when resources are scarce, and when lives hang in the balance. It's about making impossible decisions with insufficient information and still bringing your people home." The ceremony proceeded with practiced precision, speeches delivered, honors conferred, the ritualistic transformation of cadets into officers with the placement of gold bars on shoulders and the first salutes exchanged. Yet throughout it all, Olivia noticed General Reynolds continuing to glance toward her father, a strange intensity in his expression that she couldn't decode. After the ceremony, the newly commissioned officers dispersed among proud families and friends in the reception hall. Olivia made her way through the crowd toward her father, accepting congratulations from instructors and classmates as she passed. "There's my girl," her father beamed as she approached, his weathered hands gripping the wheels of his chair. "Second Lieutenant Olivia Reeves. Your mother would have been so proud." Olivia leaned down to embrace him, inhaling the familiar scent of starched uniform and the subtle cologne he'd worn for as long as she could remember. "Thanks, Dad. I wouldn't be here without you." "Nonsense," he replied with a gruff affection that had always been his way. "You earned every bit of this on your own merit. I just provided the DNA and occasional pep talks. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. As they spoke, Olivia became aware of a presence approaching them. She turned to find General Reynolds standing there, his aide hovering a respectful distance behind. "Lieutenant Reeves," the general acknowledged with a nod. "Congratulations on your achievement. Your academic record is impressive." "Thank you, sir," Olivia replied, snapping to attention automatically. But Reynolds wasn't looking at her anymore. His gaze had shifted to her father, a strange intensity in his expression. "Master Sergeant James Reeves," Reynolds said, not as a question, but as a statement of recognition. 101st Airborne, Operation Resolute Summit, 2012. The reception hall seemed to fade away as her father's hands tightened on the wheels of his chair. Yes, sir. Though it's been a long time since anyone's addressed me by rank. Not long enough, Sergeant, Reynolds replied, an unfamiliar emotion threading through his voice. Not nearly long enough. Olivia looked between the two men, sensing the electric current of shared history arcing between them. Her father had rarely spoken about his final deployment, the one that had cost him his leg and ended his military career. She knew the basic outline: a reconnaissance mission gone wrong, an improvised explosive device, a desperate evacuation under fire, but her father had always deflected when she'd pressed for details. You two know each other? She asked, the question falling into the charged silence. Reynolds didn't answer immediately, his eyes still locked with her father's. You could say that, Lieutenant, though we haven't had the pleasure of a formal introduction until now. Her father's expression was unreadable, a soldier's mask that revealed nothing of the thoughts behind it. The general and I crossed paths briefly in Afghanistan. Different units, different missions, but the same war. There was something in his tone that told Olivia there was more to the story, much more. But this wasn't the time or place to press for details. I'd like to speak with both of you, Reynolds said, his composure returning. Privately, if possible. Of course, sir, Olivia replied, though her father remained silent, his hands now perfectly still on the wheels of his chair. Reynolds gestured toward a small conference room off the main reception hall. My aide will ensure we're not disturbed. As Olivia wheeled her father into the room, her mind raced through possibilities. Had she unwittingly violated some regulation? Was there a problem with her commissioning? Or did this have something to do with her first assignment, which she was still awaiting? Reynolds closed the door behind them, the click of the latch echoing in the sudden quiet. For a moment he simply stood there, a titan of military authority suddenly looking uncertain, almost vulnerable. 13 years, he finally said. 13 years I've been looking for you, Sergeant Reeves. Her father's posture remained rigid, his expression carefully neutral. I wasn't aware I was lost, sir. Lost, no. Deliberately difficult to find, perhaps. Reynolds moved to sit across from them, reducing the formal distance his standing position created. After you were evacuated, I tried to locate you. Hospital records, unit transfers, rehabilitation centers. You seemed to vanish from the system. With respect, General, I wasn't interested in being found, her father replied. I had a daughter to raise and a new life to build. Olivia felt like an intruder in a conversation laden with subtext she couldn't decipher. I don't understand, she said, looking between the two men. Why were you looking for my father? Reynolds' gaze shifted to her, assessing, calculating, as if deciding how much to reveal. Because I owe him my life, Lieutenant, and the lives of 11 other men who came home from that valley when, by all rights, we should have died there. The words fell like stones into still water, ripples of revelation expanding outward. Olivia turned to her father, who was staring at his hands, the ceremonial sword across his lap now seeming to carry the weight of the history between these two men. Dad? She prompted when he remained silent. Her father sighed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his lungs. It was just doing my job, sir. Anyone would have done the same. No, Reynolds said with quiet certainty. No, they wouldn't have. And we both know it. The general turned back to Olivia, his expression softening slightly. Lieutenant, what do you know about Operation Resolute Summit? Not much, she admitted. It was a joint operation with Afghan forces in Kunar province. My father was part of a reconnaissance team providing intelligence for the main force. His unit encountered an IED and he was injured in the blast. That's about all he's ever told me. Reynolds nodded slowly. That's the official record, yes. Accurate but incomplete. Sir, her father interjected, a warning in his voice. Some stories aren't meant to be shared. And some debts can't remain unpaid. Reynolds countered. Your daughter has earned the right to know what kind of man her father is. What kind of legacy she's inheriting, along with that sword. The mention of the sword drew Olivia's attention to it. resting across her father's lap like a barrier between past and present. She'd grown up seeing it mounted above the fireplace in their home, taken down only for special occasions like today. It had belonged to her grandfather and his father before him, a symbol of the Reeves family's military tradition. "What happened in Afghanistan, General?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Reynolds leaned back in his chair, his eyes taking on the distant look of someone revisiting a memory carved too deeply to ever fully fade. "I was a colonel then, commanding a special operations task force. We were sent to capture or kill a high-value target who had been responsible for numerous attacks on coalition forces. Intelligence placed him in a remote village in the Kunar Valley, treacherous terrain, hostile population, minimal support available." Olivia listened, watching her father from the corner of her eye. His face remained impassive, but his right hand had moved to absently massage the thigh above his missing knee, a habit she'd noticed whenever old pains, physical or otherwise, resurfaced. "Your father's reconnaissance team was sent ahead to verify the intelligence and provide terrain analysis," Reynolds continued. "They weren't supposed to engage, just observe and report back. But intelligence in war is rarely perfect, Lieutenant. The enemy's strength was significantly underestimated, and they had advance warning of our operation." "A trap," Olivia said, the tactical implications immediately clear from her training. "Precisely. My task force walked into an ambush, well-positioned enemy fighters with heavy weapons on the high ground. We were pinned down in a narrow valley with minimal cover, taking casualties, and our air support was delayed by weather conditions in the mountains." Reynolds' gaze shifted back to her father. "Your father's team was positioned on a ridge overlooking the valley. They had a clear view of the ambush unfolding. By doctrine and orders, they should have maintained their observation position and reported the situation. But they didn't," Olivia guessed, looking at her father with new understanding. "No," Reynolds confirmed. "Sergeant Reeves made a different call. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, his team initiated an attack on the enemy's flank, creating the impression of a much larger force and drawing fire away from my trapped men." Her father shifted uncomfortably in his wheelchair. "We had the high ground and element of surprise. It was the tactically sound decision." "It was a decision that saved my task force," Reynolds corrected. "But it came at a cost. The enemy quickly realized they were being engaged by a small recon team and shifted their focus. Your father's position came under intense fire." Olivia could picture it clearly, the rocky Afghan terrain, the chaos of battle, her father making split-second decisions under fire. Her aerospace engineering training might have prepared her for different challenges than ground combat, but the principles of leadership under pressure were universal across military disciplines. "During the firefight, your father identified the enemy commander coordinating the ambush," Reynolds continued. "He realized that neutralizing this target might create enough confusion in the enemy ranks for my men to break contact and reach safer ground." Her father's hand had stopped its restless movement on his leg, his entire body now still as the general recounted events he'd clearly tried to leave behind. "What my report doesn't mention," Reynolds said, his voice dropping slightly, "is that Sergeant Reeves left the relative safety of his position to advance alone toward the enemy commander's location. He moved across open terrain under heavy fire to reach a position where he could effectively engage the target." "You broke cover?" Olivia asked, turning to her father in disbelief. Even with her limited combat training, she understood the suicidal nature of such a maneuver. Her father met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw something unguarded in his eyes. Not pride or bravado, but the simple clarity of a man who had made peace with his choices long ago. "I had the shot," he said simply. "Sometimes that's all the justification you need." Reynolds nodded in solemn agreement. He eliminated the enemy commander and 2 of his lieutenants in rapid succession. The resulting confusion gave my men the window we needed to reposition and eventually fight our way out of the ambush. But, Olivia prompted, knowing there was more to the story, the part that explained her father's wheelchair and the general's 13-year search. But as Sergeant Reeves was returning to his team's position, he triggered an IED that had been placed as part of the ambush preparation. Reynolds finished. The explosion severely wounded him and alerted nearby enemy fighters to his location. Her father's expression hardened slightly. "The rest isn't relevant to the lieutenant, sir." "I disagree, Sergeant," Reynolds replied. The full measure of a person's character is revealed not just in moment-of-decision heroics, but in sustained courage under the most extreme circumstances. He turned back to Olivia. Despite catastrophic injuries to his right leg and significant blood loss, your father continued to fight, holding off enemy fighters who were attempting to reach his position. He maintained radio contact with his team, directing their fire to protect both himself and my withdrawing task force. By the time we were able to reach him and provide medical evacuation, he had been fighting alone for over 40 minutes. The room fell silent as Olivia absorbed this revelation about the father she thought she'd known completely. She'd grown up seeing his disability as simply part of who he was, never fully considering the crucible in which that change had been forged. "Why isn't any of this in the official record?" she finally asked. "Why wasn't he recognized for his actions?" Reynolds' expression tightened. "Politics, Lieutenant. The operation was technically outside our authorized area of operations. Acknowledging what happened would have created diplomatic complications with our host nation at a sensitive time. Your father was awarded a Purple Heart for his injuries, but the true nature of his actions remained classified." "I didn't want recognition," her father interjected. "I just wanted to heal and get back to raising you. The medals and ceremonies, they don't change anything about what happened that day." Reynolds leaned forward, his posture shifting from relaxed to intensely present. "Perhaps not for you, Sergeant. But they matter to those of us who came home because of your actions. They matter to the families who didn't receive folded flags because you were willing to place yourself between them and tragedy." Her father looked away, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Ancient history, sir." "Not to me," Reynolds replied, "not to any of the men who were there. And it shouldn't be buried history to your daughter either." Olivia felt a tangle of emotions. Pride in her father's courage, confusion about his silence all these years, and a dawning understanding of the legacy she was now carrying forward as an officer. "Why are you telling us this now, General?" she asked. "After all these years?" Reynolds straightened in his chair, the personal conversation shifting subtly back toward the professional. "Two reasons, Lieutenant. First, because I believe in acknowledging debts, even when they can never truly be repaid. And second, because it relates directly to your future in the Air Force." Olivia's heart raced as she processed the General's words. Her father's story had already upended everything she thought she knew about his military service. But now, Reynolds was suggesting it somehow connected to her own future. "I don't understand, sir," she said, straightening in her chair. "How does my father's service relate to my assignment?" Reynolds exchanged a meaningful glance with her father before continuing. "Lieutenant, your academic performance and aptitude tests have qualified you for several elite programs. Your file has been flagged for potential assignment to the Aerospace Testing Division at Edwards Air Force Base." Olivia couldn't suppress a small intake of breath. The ATD was the pinnacle of Air Force aerospace engineering, where theoretical concepts became functioning aircraft, where the boundaries of flight were constantly being pushed. It was a posting that most engineers in her position would sacrifice years of their career to obtain. "It's an exceptional opportunity," Reynolds continued, "but it's also a posting that requires more than just technical brilliance. The test pilots and engineers at Edwards make life-or-death decisions with incomplete information on a regular basis. They need to understand not just how systems function on paper, but how they perform under the most extreme conditions." Her father's hands tightened on the armrests of his wheelchair. "Sir, if you're suggesting that my actions somehow qualify Olivia for special consideration—" "I'm suggesting nothing of the sort, Sergeant," Reynolds interrupted. "Your daughter's qualifications stand on their own merit. What I am saying is that her technical expertise, combined with the intangible qualities she may have inherited from you— judgment under pressure, moral courage, willingness to accept personal risk for the greater good— these make her uniquely suited for the work being done at Edwards." Olivia studied the General's face, sensing there was still something he wasn't saying. "Sir, with respect, there are many qualified engineers in my graduating class. Why single me out for this conversation?" Reynolds smiled slightly, the expression softening his commanding presence. "Direct questioning. Another quality you seem to share with your father." He leaned forward, lowering his voice slightly, even though they were alone in the room. "Lieutenant, are you familiar with Project Aurora?" The name sent a jolt through Olivia's system. Aurora was whispered about in engineering circles, a classified hypersonic aircraft program that supposedly pushed the boundaries of what was currently possible in aerospace design. Most considered it more legend than reality, the modern equivalent of the mythical State Route 71 Blackbird program from decades earlier. I've heard rumors, sir. Nothing concrete. As it should be, Reynolds nodded. What I can tell you is that the Air Force is developing next-generation aircraft with capabilities that would have seemed like science fiction just a few years ago. And these projects need officers who understand both the technical complexities and the human factors involved in operating such machines. Her father had gone completely still, his expression unreadable. General, is this conversation classified? Consider it preliminary recruitment, Sergeant, Reynolds replied. No classified details are being shared yet. He turned back to Olivia. Lieutenant, I've reviewed your thesis on adaptive control systems for hypersonic flight regimes. Your theoretical framework for managing aerothermal stresses during sustained Mach 7+ operations was impressive. Olivia's mind raced. Her thesis had been theoretical, built on publicly available research and mathematical models. The fact that Reynolds was connecting it to a classified program suggested her hypothetical solutions might have practical applications she hadn't considered. Thank you, sir. But those were just theoretical constructs based on limited information. Theory becomes practice, Lieutenant. That's how progress happens. Reynolds stood, signaling the conversation was shifting. Your orders will be finalized next week. Should you receive an assignment to Edwards, I suggest you accept it. Olivia rose as well, military courtesy ingrained after 4 years at the academy. Yes, sir. Reynolds moved toward the door, then paused and turned back to her father. Sergeant Reeves, the men from that day still gather once a year. Third Saturday in October, at Callahan's in Colorado Springs. We've kept a chair empty for 13 years. Consider this a formal invitation to fill it. Her father didn't respond immediately, his gaze fixed on some middle distance as if seeing ghosts from his past. Finally, he nodded once, a gesture so slight it was barely perceptible. I'll consider it, sir. Reynolds seemed to accept this as the most he could hope for. He extended his hand to Olivia. Congratulations again on your commissioning, Lieutenant. The Air Force is fortunate to have you. As the general left, closing the door behind him, Olivia turned to her father. For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of revelations hanging in the air between them. Why didn't you ever tell me? She finally asked, the question emerging softer than she'd intended. Her father sighed, his hands absently adjusting the ceremonial sword across his lap. What was I supposed to say, Liv? That I left 11 men to die or that I left you without a father? Neither choice was acceptable, so I made the only decision I could live with. You didn't leave me without a father, she protested. You came home, not all of me, he replied, his hand drifting to the empty space below his knee. And not the same man who left. Olivia knelt beside his wheelchair, taking his weathered hands in hers. Dad, what you did, it was extraordinary. He shook his head, a hint of frustration crossing his features. That's exactly why I never told you. There was nothing extraordinary about it. In that moment, there was no grand heroism, no noble sacrifice, just a series of tactical decisions made under fire. The same decisions any soldier with the same training would have made. Reynolds doesn't seem to think so, she countered. Reynolds sees what he needs to see, her father replied. He carries the weight of commanding men who died under his orders. Finding meaning in survival is how officers cope with that burden. Olivia considered this perspective, trying to reconcile the father she'd always known, quiet, methodical, focused on raising her after her mother's death, with the soldier who had held off enemy fighters alone for 40 minutes after losing his leg. All these years, she said quietly, I thought you became an engineer because it was practical after your injury. But you were applying the same mindset you used in combat, weren't you? Analyzing problems, identifying critical points of failure, developing solutions with limited resources. A ghost of a smile crossed her father's face. Maybe. Or maybe I just liked the certainty of mathematics after seeing how uncertain life can be. Olivia stood, moving to the window that overlooked the academy parade ground where cadets were still celebrating with their families. This Project Aurora that Reynolds mentioned. Do you think it's real? Whether it's real isn't the important question, her father replied. What matters is whether you want to be part of it. She turned back to him, struck by the simplicity of his perspective. Of course I do. It's the cutting edge of aerospace engineering. It's everything I've trained for. Is it? He challenged gently. Or is it just the most prestigious assignment available? There's a difference between chasing excellence and chasing recognition, Liv. I learned that difference in a valley in Afghanistan. The question landed with unexpected weight, forcing Olivia to examine her motivations more deeply than she had before. Was she drawn to the project because of the work itself, or because of what such an assignment would mean for her career? I want to build aircraft that keep pilots safe, she said finally. Systems that function when everything else fails. The kind of redundancies that might have prevented what happened to you. Her father nodded slowly, seeming to accept the sincerity in her answer. Then it sounds like you know what you want. A knock at the door interrupted them, followed by the entrance of her father's aide, Technical Sergeant Maria Diaz, who had been assigned to assist him during his visit to the academy. I'm sorry to interrupt, sir, ma'am, Diaz said, but the reception is winding down, and your transport back to lodging is waiting. Thank you, Sergeant, her father replied. We'll be right there. As Diaz withdrew, Olivia moved behind her father's wheelchair, preparing to guide him back to the reception, but he placed a hand on the wheel, stopping her. Liv, he said, his voice taking on a tone she rarely heard, the voice of Master Sergeant Reeves rather than James, her father. Whatever you decide about Edwards and this Aurora project, remember something. Engineering doesn't happen in a vacuum. The systems you design will be operated by people. Fallible, imperfect people who will push those systems beyond their intended parameters when lives are on the line. She nodded, understanding the wisdom in his words. I'll remember. Good, he said, his voice warming again. Now, I believe we have some celebrating to do. It's not every day my daughter becomes an officer. 3 weeks later, Olivia stood at the edge of Rogers Dry Lake at Edwards Air Force Base. The vast expanse of hardened clay stretching before her like an alien landscape. The California desert heat pressed down with physical weight, but she barely noticed, her attention fixed on the dark speck approaching from the eastern horizon. The aircraft appeared to materialize from the heat haze, its distinctive delta wing profile becoming clearer as it descended toward the lakebed runway. Even from this distance, she could tell it wasn't a standard Air Force inventory aircraft. Its lines were too sleek, its proportions unlike anything in active service. Impressive, isn't it? Said a voice beside her. Olivia turned to find Colonel Elaine Winters, the director of the Aerospace Testing Division, and her new commanding officer, standing next to her. Winters was in her late 40s, with close-cropped salt-and-pepper hair and the lean physique of someone who maintained the same fitness standards she'd had as a test pilot 20 years earlier. Yes, ma'am, Olivia replied. Is that the reason you're here? One of them. Winters lifted her binoculars to track the aircraft's approach. X-72A prototype, Mach 9 capability. Integrated neural responsive flight controls. Aerodynamic profile that adapts to atmospheric conditions in real time. And it's been trying to kill its pilots for the last 3 test flights. Olivia blinked at the casual delivery of this information. Kill them, ma'am? Not deliberately, of course. Winters lowered the binoculars, offering them to Olivia. But the adaptive systems are encountering conflicts between theoretical performance parameters and actual flight conditions. The results have been challenging for our test pilots. Olivia accepted the binoculars, focusing them on the approaching aircraft. Up close, she could see the innovative aspects of its design. The variable geometry intake system, the thermal protection layer that seemed to shimmer slightly as it dissipated heat, the control surfaces that were almost seamlessly integrated into the airframe. Theoretical models predicted the craft would automatically compensate for thermoelastic deformation during hypersonic transition. Winters continued. In practice, we're seeing harmonic oscillations that threaten structural integrity at precisely the moment when the pilot needs to focus on navigating the transonic regime. Olivia lowered the binoculars, her mind already breaking down the problem into its component parts. Have you tried dampening the feedback loop through the flight control system if the neural interface is amplifying pilot inputs during periods of high stress? Winters smiled slightly. We have indeed, Lieutenant. That was one of the modifications tested in today's flight. The results should be interesting to analyze. The X-72A touched down on the lakebed with a grace that belied its experimental nature, rolling to a stop as ground crews rushed forward to secure the aircraft. As the canopy opened, Olivia could see the pilot removing his helmet. his movements suggesting both exhaustion and tension. Major Conrad has been our primary test pilot on the X-72A program, Winters explained. Former F-22 pilot, over 2,000 flight hours in experimental aircraft, one of the best we have. They watched as Conrad descended from the cockpit, going through the post-flight procedures with practiced efficiency despite his obvious fatigue. When he spotted Winters, he altered his path to approach them. "Colonel," he acknowledged, then turned a questioning gaze toward Olivia. "Major Peter Conrad, meet Lieutenant Olivia Reeves." Winters made the introduction. "Our newest systems engineer and the fresh perspective we've been waiting for on the neural interface issues." Conrad's expression remained neutral, but Olivia caught the slight tightening around his eyes. Another green lieutenant with theoretical knowledge but no practical experience. She could almost hear his thoughts. "Lieutenant," he nodded curtly, "welcome to Edwards." "Thank you, sir," she replied. "How was the flight?" "Ask me after I stop seeing the warning lights flashing behind my eyelids," he said, removing his gloves with barely contained frustration. The dampening modifications helped with the minor oscillations, but the primary harmonic is still building during the transition. We're missing something fundamental in how the system processes pilot intentions versus aircraft capabilities. Olivia hesitated, then decided directness was better than pretending she understood more than she did. "Sir, if you have time, I'd appreciate hearing your first-hand experience with the neural interface. The technical specifications I've reviewed don't fully capture the subjective aspects of the system." Conrad studied her for a moment, as if reassessing his initial impression. "I'll be in debrief for the next 2 hours, Lieutenant. Meet me in the simulator bay at 1600, and I'll show you exactly what it feels like when a $9 billion experimental aircraft decides to interpret your survival instinct as a request to tear itself apart." As he walked away, Winters chuckled softly. "Don't mind Peter. He's not actually angry at you. He's angry at physics for not conforming to our engineering expectations." "I understand, ma'am," Olivia replied. "Theoretical models only take you so far." "Exactly." Winters gestured toward the administration building. "Let's get you processed in. You have temporary quarters assigned until permanent housing becomes available, and you'll need to complete security protocols before accessing the project data." As they walked, Olivia noticed the distinctive insignia on Winters' flight suit, a black triangle surrounding a stylized aurora borealis effect, with no text or identifying markers. Project Aurora, she realized. Not just a rumor after all. "Colonel," she asked carefully, "may I ask why I was selected for this assignment? There must be more experienced engineers available." Winters maintained her pace, seemingly considering the question. "Experience isn't always what we need, Lieutenant. Sometimes a fresh perspective matters more, especially when established approaches are failing." "With respect, ma'am, that doesn't really answer my question." This earned her a sidelong glance from the colonel. "Direct. Good. We need that here." Winters stopped walking, turning to face Olivia fully. "Your thesis on adaptive control systems contained several innovative approaches that aligned with problems we're currently facing. But more importantly, General Reynolds personally recommended you for the program." "General Reynolds?" Olivia tried to keep the surprise from her voice. "I only met him at graduation." "Perhaps," Winters acknowledged with a slight smile. "But he seems to think you have qualities beyond your technical expertise that make you suitable for this work. Something about understanding the human element in engineering challenges." Olivia thought of her father, of the story Reynolds had shared about Afghanistan, and suddenly understood the connection the general had been making. It wasn't just about her engineering skills. It was about approaching problems with the same mindset her father had applied in combat. Assessing situations quickly, making decisions with incomplete information, and understanding that technical systems ultimately served human needs under the most extreme conditions. "I'll do my best to live up to that expectation, ma'am," she said. "I'm counting on it, Lieutenant," Winters replied. Because the X-72A isn't just an experimental aircraft, it's the testbed for systems that will eventually protect pilots in combat environments where traditional aircraft can't survive. And right now, those systems are failing precisely when they're needed most. The significance of the assignment settled over Olivia like the desert heat, oppressive but clarifying. This wasn't just about advancing her career or working on cutting-edge technology. It was about creating systems that might someday save lives in situations like the one her father had faced, where the margin between survival and death was measured in split-second decisions and the reliability of equipment under extreme stress. "I understand, Colonel," she said, her resolve strengthening. "When can I see the full technical specifications and test flight data?" Winters smiled, apparently approving of her eagerness. "Security processing takes 48 hours. After that, you'll have access to everything we know about why the X-72A keeps trying to shake itself apart at Mach 9. In the meantime, I suggest you take Major Conrad up on his offer to experience the neural interface simulator. Understanding the problem from the pilot's perspective might give you insights that pure data analysis can't provide." As they resumed walking toward the administration building, Olivia caught sight of her reflection in the glass doors, the gold bars of a second lieutenant gleaming on her shoulders, her posture mirroring the military bearing her father had instilled in her from childhood. She thought about the ceremonial sword that had been passed down through generations of her family, now hanging on the wall of her temporary quarters, and the legacy it represented. Her father had faced his moment of truth in a valley in Afghanistan, making decisions that saved lives while knowing the personal cost might be devastating. Now she faced her own challenge, not on a battlefield with bullets and IEDs, but in the unforgiving realm where cutting-edge technology met human limitations, where theoretical models confronted physical realities, and where the consequences of failure could be just as final. "Ready to change the future of aviation, Lieutenant?" Winters asked as they reached the doors. Olivia straightened her shoulders, channeling the determination that had carried her father through his darkest hour. "Absolutely, ma'am. That's why I'm here." The simulator bay hummed with the soft electronic pulse of high-performance computing systems. Olivia stood before the neural interface pod, a modified cockpit surrounded by a hemispheric projection system designed to create an immersive flight experience. Major Conrad was already there, his flight suit exchanged for standard-issue utilities, reviewing system parameters on a nearby console. "Lieutenant," he acknowledged as she approached, "right on time." "Thank you for making time for this, Major," she replied, taking in the sophisticated setup. The simulator was far more advanced than anything she'd worked with at the Academy, a testament to the cutting-edge nature of Project Aurora. Conrad gestured to the neural interface headset resting on the pilot's seat. "Ever used one of these before?" "No, sir. I've studied the theoretical principles, but this will be my first hands-on experience." He nodded, unsurprised. "Theory and practice are distant cousins in this field, Lieutenant. The interface doesn't just read your inputs. It anticipates them based on microsignals from your motor cortex and vestibular system. The idea is to eliminate the delay between thought and action that exists with traditional flight controls." Olivia examined the sleek headset with its array of neural sensors. "And that's where the problems are occurring? In the predictive algorithms?" "Among other places." Conrad confirmed, his tone suggesting the understatement of the year. "Take a seat. I'll run you through a basic flight profile first, then show you what happens during the transition to hypersonic." For the next 30 minutes, Olivia experienced the neural interface from the pilot's perspective. The headset felt strange at first, a gentle pressure against her temples and the base of her skull, but the sensation faded as she became absorbed in the simulation. The aircraft responded not just to her physical inputs on the controls, but to her intentions, creating a seamless integration between thought and action that felt almost supernatural. "It's incredible," she breathed as the simulated X-72A executed a perfect barrel roll in response to a mere thought. "The responsiveness is unlike anything I've experienced." "That's the honeymoon phase," Conrad replied, adjusting parameters on his console. "Now let's see what happens when we push it to Mach 8 and beyond." The simulation shifted, the virtual aircraft climbing rapidly to altitude before accelerating horizontally. As the Mach numbers climbed on the heads-up display, Olivia felt the controls becoming progressively more sensitive, not in a linear way, but in unpredictable surges that made precise inputs increasingly difficult. "We're approaching the transition point," Conrad narrated. "This is where the thermal stresses begin to affect the airframe flexibility, which feeds back into the flight control system." At Mach 8, 2, the problems became dramatically apparent. The aircraft began to oscillate, subtle at first, then with increasing violence. Olivia instinctively tried to dampen the movements, but her attempts seemed to amplify the oscillations instead. "What you're experiencing now is the feedback loop," Conrad explained. "Your corrective inputs are being interpreted by the neural interface as new commands rather than compensations, creating a cascading effect. The more you try to stabilize, the worse it gets." The simulation ended abruptly as the virtual aircraft exceeded structural tolerances and broke apart. Olivia removed the headset, her hands slightly unsteady from the intensity of the experience. "That's disorienting," she admitted. "It felt like the aircraft was fighting me." "Exactly," Conrad nodded, seeming pleased that she'd articulated the problem so precisely. "And that's with you knowing it was coming. Imagine experiencing it for the first time at actual hypersonic speeds, with actual G-forces compounding the disorientation." Olivia processed this information, her mind already dissecting the problem. The interface is designed to anticipate pilot intentions, but at high speeds, pilots instinctively try to counter the oscillations, creating a conflict between their conscious inputs and the system's predictions. "That's our working theory," Conrad confirmed. "The question is how to break that cycle without losing the advantages the neural interface provides in normal flight regimes. Have you tried introducing a dynamic dampening coefficient that scales with Mach number?" Olivia asked, reaching for the terminal to input equations that were forming in her mind. Conrad watched with interest as her fingers flew across the keyboard, mathematical models taking shape on the screen. "We've implemented similar approaches, but nothing that adapts in real time to both aircraft performance and pilot response patterns." For the next 2 hours, they worked side by side, Olivia developing theoretical modifications to the interface algorithms while Conrad tested them in the simulator. Their collaboration fell into a natural rhythm, her engineering insight complemented by his practical experience as a test pilot. "This shows promise," Conrad said finally, reviewing the results of their latest simulation run. The oscillations hadn't been eliminated entirely, but their amplitude had been significantly reduced. "Where did you come up with this approach?" Olivia hesitated, unsure how to explain that her solution had been inspired by something her father had once told her about combat scenarios. How soldiers learn to differentiate between reflexive responses and intentional actions under stress. "I was thinking about how the human brain processes feedback under extreme conditions," she said instead. "The key isn't to eliminate the instinctive responses, but to recognize them as distinct from deliberate commands." Conrad studied her with newfound respect. "Not bad for your first day, Lieutenant. We'll need to refine this further, but you've given us a new direction to explore." As they powered down the simulator, Conrad's professional demeanor softened slightly. "Most engineers approach these problems from a purely technical perspective. They forget there's a human being in the cockpit who's fighting not just the aircraft but their own biological responses to stress. My father always said that systems fail in ways their designers never anticipated, because humans use them in ways they never intended," Olivia replied. "Smart man, your father," Conrad commented. "Military? Army?" 101st Airborne, Olivia said, a hint of pride creeping into her voice. "Lost his leg in Afghanistan but taught me more about engineering than 4 years at the academy." Conrad's expression shifted subtly. "Afghanistan? What year?" 2012. Operation Resolute Summit. The test pilot went completely still, his eyes narrowing as he processed this information. "Your father is James Reeves." Olivia's surprise must have been evident because Conrad continued before she could respond. "My older brother was there, Captain Michael Conrad, 5th Special Forces Group. He was part of the task force your father saved." A complex mix of emotions crossed Conrad's face. "I've heard the story dozens of times. How a recon sergeant single-handedly changed the course of an ambush that should have wiped out the entire team." The coincidence was so unexpected that Olivia momentarily struggled to find words. "Major Conrad, Pete," he interrupted. "Call me Pete, at least when we're not on the flight line." He extended his hand. "Looks like I owe your family twice now. Once for my brother's life, and once for helping solve a problem that's been driving me crazy for months." As they shook hands, Olivia felt a shift in their dynamic. No longer just a senior officer and a new lieutenant, but two people connected by a shared history neither had known about until this moment. "I should have recognized the name," Conrad continued, "but Reeves isn't uncommon. and I didn't make the connection. My father doesn't talk about it much, Olivia explained. I only learned the full story at graduation, when General Reynolds told me. Conrad raised an eyebrow. Reynolds was there too. That explains his interest in your career. He glanced at his watch. The officers' mess should be serving dinner now. Join me? I'd like to hear more about your father, and I can fill you in on the X-72A program beyond what you'll find in the technical documentation. The offer was both professional courtesy and something more personal, an acknowledgement of the unexpected bond they'd discovered. I'd like that, sir. Pete? Olivia corrected herself. As they walked toward the officers' mess, Conrad's communicator chirped with an incoming message. He checked it, his expression turning serious. Change of plans, Lieutenant. Colonel Winters wants us in the command center immediately. They've moved up the timeline for the next test flight. Already? Olivia asked, surprised. But we haven't had time to fully implement the modifications we just developed. Welcome to the bleeding edge of aerospace development, Conrad replied grimly. Sometimes the schedule drives the engineering rather than the other way around. The command center was a hive of controlled activity when they arrived. Multiple screens displayed technical readouts, weather data, and satellite imagery of the test range. Colonel Winters stood at the center of it all, conferring with a group of senior officers Olivia didn't recognize. Conrad, Reeves, good, you're here. Winters acknowledged them. We have a situation. The X-72A test flight has been rescheduled for 0600 tomorrow. Ma'am, with respect, we're not ready, Conrad protested. The neural interface modifications need at least a week of simulation testing before implementation. Winters' expression was grim. I'm aware, Major. But we've received intelligence that competitors are advancing rapidly with their own hypersonic program. The Secretary of Defense has personally requested an acceleration of our timeline. One of the unfamiliar officers, a brigadier general with intelligence insignia, stepped forward. Our satellites have detected test activities at a remote facility in Asia that suggest they're preparing for a hypersonic flight test within the next 72 hours. If successful, it would significantly erode our technological advantage. So we're rushing an unproven aircraft into a test flight because of geopolitical concerns? Conrad asked, his frustration evident despite his attempt to maintain professional decorum. We're adapting to changing circumstances, Major. Winters corrected firmly. Lieutenant Reeves, I understand you and Conrad have developed a potential solution to the oscillation problem? Put on the spot, Olivia straightened. Yes, ma'am. We've identified a promising approach, but it needs further refinement and testing before implementation in an actual flight. You have until 0400 to refine it as much as possible, Winters replied. At that point, we need to upload the modified software to the X-72A and prepare for the test flight. Conrad's jaw tightened. Colonel, I have to formally register my concern about the compressed timeline. We're talking about potentially catastrophic failure modes if these modifications don't perform as expected. Noted, Major. Winters acknowledged. But the flight is happening regardless. The question is whether you'll be in the cockpit with our best available solution, or with the same system that nearly tore the aircraft apart on the last 3 attempts. The implicit challenge hung in the air. Conrad turned to Olivia. Looks like we've got a long night ahead, Lieutenant. Let's get back to the simulator. As they left the command center, Olivia's mind raced with the implications. Her first day on the project, and already she was directly involved in modifications that could determine the success or failure of a critical test flight, potentially even the safety of the pilot. This is insane, Conrad muttered once they were out of earshot. Rushing unproven modifications because of political pressure. We can do this, Olivia replied with more confidence than she felt. The core concept is sound. We just need to optimize the parameters and build in safety margins. Conrad gave her a sidelong glance. Optimistic, aren't you? Realistic, she corrected. We don't have the luxury of perfect solutions, just the best we can create under the circumstances. My father once told me that's when engineering becomes an art rather than just a science. This earned her a hint of a smile. Your father seems full of wisdom. He had to rebuild his entire life after Afghanistan, Olivia replied. He knows something about adapting to impossible situations. They worked through the night in the simulator bay, refining algorithms and testing edge cases, As hours passed, they developed a strange, intense camaraderie born of shared purpose and exhaustion. By 0300, they had a solution that consistently improved the aircraft's stability during the critical transition phase, though not without limitations. "It's still not perfect," Conrad observed as they reviewed the final simulation results. "The oscillations return at Mach 8.7, though at reduced amplitude." "But it gives you a wider envelope to work with," Olivia pointed out. "And, more importantly, it provides a clear warning before the system begins to destabilize, rather than the sudden onset we saw in previous versions." Conrad nodded, rubbing his eyes from fatigue. "It'll have to do. We need to get this uploaded and verified before pre-flight checks begin." As they walked toward the hangar where the X-72A waited, dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky. The desert air held the crisp chill that would burn away as soon as the sun cleared the horizon. In the distance, mountains stood silhouetted against the gradually brightening backdrop, reminding Olivia of how her father had described the Afghan landscape. "Have you ever been afraid before a test flight?" she asked Conrad, the question emerging from her exhaustion-lowered inhibitions. He considered this for a moment before answering. "Not afraid, exactly. Intensely aware of the risks, yes. But there's something about strapping yourself to experimental aircraft that requires a certain comfort with uncertainty." "Like my father walking into an ambush alone," Olivia mused. Conrad glanced at her. "Different circumstances, but similar mindset, I suppose. You accept that you're pushing boundaries, that there are unknowns you can't fully control, and you trust your training and instincts to guide you through." They reached the hangar, where the X-72A sat under bright lights, ground crews already swarming around it in preparation for the morning flight. The aircraft looked both alien and beautiful, a glimpse of the future made tangible in carbon composites and advanced alloys. "Upload the modifications to the primary flight control system," Conrad instructed the lead engineer. "I want a full diagnostic verification before I even think about starting pre-flight checks." While the technical team implemented their changes, Conrad disappeared to suit up for the flight. Olivia found herself standing beside the aircraft, studying its lines, and mentally tracing the flow of systems that would soon be put to the ultimate test. Her father's ceremonial sword seemed far away now, but the legacy it represented felt present in this moment of engineering truth. Colonel Winters appeared beside her, coffee in hand. "How confident are you in these modifications, Lieutenant?" "They represent significant improvement over the previous configuration, ma'am," Olivia replied carefully. "But they haven't been tested through the full flight envelope. There are still risks." Winters nodded, unsurprised by the honest assessment. "There are always risks in this business. That's why we need people who understand not just the technical aspects, but the human element as well." She studied Olivia thoughtfully. "Your father faced impossible odds in Afghanistan and found a way through. I'm hoping that same ingenuity runs in the family." Before Olivia could respond, Conrad returned in his flight suit, helmet tucked under his arm. He looked calm but focused, the way Olivia imagined her father might have looked before combat missions. "System diagnostics are green across the board," the lead engineer reported. "Neural interface is calibrated and responding within parameters." Conrad nodded, then turned to Olivia. "Any last words of wisdom from the engineer who rewrote my flight control system overnight?" Despite the gravity of the moment, Olivia felt a smile tug at her lips. Trust the system to do its job, but be ready to take over when it reaches its limits. Just like any good partnership. "I'll remember that," Conrad replied, his expression softening momentarily. Then the professional mask returned as he turned to Colonel Winters. "Request permission to proceed with a test flight, ma'am." "Granted, Major. Godspeed." Winters turned to the control team. "Initiate launch sequence." The next hour passed in a blur of technical procedures and controlled tension. Olivia found herself stationed at a monitoring console in the control center, tracking the neural interface's performance metrics in real time. As Conrad taxied the X-72A to the runway and began his takeoff rotation, Conrad's voice came through the comms as the sleek aircraft lifted from the runway and began climbing steeply into the brightening sky. "Systems nominal," Olivia reported, watching the data streams flowing across her screen. "Neural interface, operating within expected parameters." The X-72A disappeared from visual tracking as it continued its climb, now visible only through radar and telemetry data. Conrad's voice remained calm in their headsets as he called out altitude and speed milestones. Passing 60,000 feet. Beginning acceleration run, he reported. Mach 3. Mach 4. Olivia focused intently on the neural interface data, watching for any signs of the oscillation pattern they'd worked all night to mitigate. So far, the system was performing exactly as their simulations had predicted. Approaching Mach 7, Conrad announced. Preparing for transition to hypersonic regime. This was the critical moment, the point where previous flights had encountered the destabilizing oscillations. Olivia held her breath as the Mach indicator continued to climb. Mach 8, Conrad reported, his voice betraying no tension. Neural interface compensation is active and functioning. Minor oscillations present but within manageable parameters. A ripple of cautious optimism spread through the control center. Olivia exchanged glances with Colonel Winters, who gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. Mach 8. 5, Conrad continued. Oscillation amplitude increasing but still within tolerance. The dampening algorithm is performing as expected. They'd done it. Their overnight modifications were working, allowing the X-72A to maintain stable flight well into the hypersonic regime. Olivia felt a surge of professional pride, tinged with relief that Conrad wouldn't be facing the same dangerous conditions that had plagued previous test flights. Then, without warning, multiple warning indicators flashed red on her console. Unexpected thermal stress detected in the port wing structure, she reported, her training taking over despite the sudden surge of alarm. Major, the neural interface is registering anomalous feedback patterns. I feel it, Conrad replied, his voice tightening slightly. The dampening algorithm is struggling to compensate, initiating manual override procedures. Olivia's fingers flew across her keyboard, analyzing the incoming data. The thermal gradient is more severe than our models predicted. It's creating asymmetric structural deformation that the neural interface is interpreting as pilot input. The control center erupted into controlled chaos as engineers and technicians worked to understand and address the emerging crisis. Colonel Winters moved to the central command station, her voice cutting through the tension. Major Conrad, what's your assessment? Can you maintain control? There was a pause before Conrad's response came through, each word measured and precise. Affirmative, Colonel, but I need to reduce speed immediately. Requesting clearance to abort the test profile and initiate emergency descent procedures. Quote, granted, Winters replied without hesitation. Safety protocols are now in effect. All stations, support emergency descent operations. Olivia stared at her display, watching as the X-72A began decelerating. The thermal stress indicators remained critical, but at least they weren't getting worse. Conrad was fighting to bring the aircraft back under control, using the manual override systems they'd integrated into their modifications as a failsafe. Lieutenant Reeves, Winters called, gesturing her over to the main engineering station. I need your assessment. What happened up there? Olivia quickly analyzed the data flowing across the screens. The port wing experienced thermal expansion beyond our predicted models, ma'am. It created an asymmetric control condition that our modifications weren't designed to handle. Can Conrad land this aircraft safely? The question carried the weight of lives and billions of dollars in research. Olivia studied the telemetry data, thinking not just as an engineer but as the daughter of a soldier who had made impossible decisions under fire. Yes, ma'am, she said with conviction. The structural integrity is compromised but still within operational limits. As long as Major Conrad maintains the current descent profile, the aircraft should remain controllable. Winters held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. Keep monitoring those stress indicators. If anything changes, I want to know immediately. For the next 20 minutes, the control center remained in a state of tense focus as Conrad guided the damaged X-72A back toward Rogers Dry Lake. The hypersonic test had failed, but a new challenge had taken its place, bringing pilot and aircraft home safely despite the unexpected complications. Passing through 30,000 feet, Conrad reported. Controls are responding sluggishly, but I've got her. Requesting emergency crews on standby at the lakebed. Already in position, Major. Winters confirmed. You're cleared for a straight-in approach to runway 23. Olivia watched the thermal stress indicators gradually subsiding as the aircraft descended into denser atmosphere. The asymmetric condition remained, but Conrad was compensating skillfully, using his experience to work around the limitations of the damaged control systems. "I have visual on the lakebed," Conrad announced as the X-72A emerged from the clouds. Commencing final approach. Every person in the control center seemed to hold their breath as the experimental aircraft lined up with the runway. Its descent was steeper than normal, its attitude slightly askew due to the damaged wing, but Conrad's hands on the controls were steady. The X-72A touched down with a shower of sparks as the compromised wing structure scraped against the lakebed surface. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed the aircraft might cartwheel, but Conrad maintained directional control, bringing it to a skidding halt as emergency vehicles raced toward the scene. "X-72A is down and secure," Conrad reported, his voice betraying fatigue but no panic. "Aircraft damage is significant but repairable. Pilot could use a cup of coffee." A ripple of nervous laughter broke the tension in the control center. Colonel Winters keyed her microphone. "Excellent work, Major. Medical team is en route to your position." Olivia sagged in her chair, the adrenaline that had sustained her through the crisis now ebbing away. They hadn't achieved their primary mission objectives, but Conrad was safe, and the X-72A, while damaged, would fly again. In the world of experimental aviation, that counted as a qualified success. "Not quite the result we hoped for," Winters commented, appearing beside her. "But not a failure either. Your modifications gave Major Conrad the margin he needed to maintain control when the unexpected occurred. That's engineering at its best." "Thank you, ma'am," Olivia replied. "But we still don't understand why the thermal stress pattern differed so dramatically from our models." "That," Winters said with a slight smile, "is tomorrow's problem. For now, I suggest you get some rest. You've been awake for over 24 hours, and we need you sharp for the post-flight analysis." As Olivia left the control center, she spotted a familiar figure waiting in the corridor. Major Conrad, still in his flight suit, being examined by a flight surgeon despite his obvious impatience. "Lieutenant," he called when he saw her, "your modifications saved my life up there." The old system would have gone into unrecoverable oscillation the moment that wing began deforming. "We still miss something critical in the thermal modeling," Olivia pointed out. Conrad shook his head. "Engineering isn't about perfect prediction. It's about creating systems that can handle imperfection. Your father would understand that better than most." The mention of her father brought a sudden wave of emotion. In the intensity of the past 24 hours, she'd been too focused on the immediate challenges to consider the parallels between her situation and his experience in Afghanistan. Both had faced unexpected crises where lives hung in the balance. Both had improvised solutions with limited information and resources. And both had ultimately succeeded not through perfect execution but through adaptability under pressure. "He would," she agreed quietly. "And he'd remind me that coming home safely is sometimes victory enough." Conrad nodded, wincing slightly as the flight surgeon probed a bruise on his shoulder. "Smart man, your father. I'd like to meet him someday." "You might get that chance sooner than you think," Olivia replied, remembering General Reynolds' invitation. "The third Saturday in October isn't far away." Callahan's bar in Colorado Springs hummed with the murmured conversations of men who had shared combat experiences that few others could understand. The establishment wasn't fancy: weathered wood floors, dim lighting, and the faint scent of decades of beer and whiskey permeating the furniture. But it had become a sanctuary of sorts for veterans who gathered to remember, to honor, and sometimes to heal. Olivia stood at the entrance, her father beside her in his wheelchair. His hands rested on the ceremonial sword across his lap, a tradition he had insisted on maintaining for this particular reunion. In the 3 months since her graduation, they had grown closer than they had been in years, their conversations deeper and more honest since the revelation of his actions in Afghanistan. "You don't have to do this," she told him quietly, noticing the tension in his shoulders. "We can still turn around." James Reeves adjusted his tie, the same one he had worn to her commissioning ceremony, and shook his head. 13 years is long enough to run from the past, Liv. Besides," he added with a hint of a smile, "I hear you've made quite an impression on the Aurora project." Seems only fair I meet the men whose lives apparently set you on that path. The X-72A test flight and its aftermath had accelerated Olivia's career in ways neither of them had anticipated. The insights gained from the thermal anomaly had led to crucial redesigns in the hypersonic aircraft's wing structure. Colonel Winters had personally commended her ability to perform under pressure, and Major Conrad, Pete, had become both mentor and friend, insisting that she be included in all aspects of the program's development. "Lieutenant Reeves." A familiar voice cut through her thoughts as Pete Conrad approached from inside the bar. He was in civilian clothes, but his military bearing remained evident in his posture and the precision of his movements. "And Sergeant Reeves." "It's an honor, sir." James nodded, accepting the extended hand. "Major Conrad, my daughter speaks highly of you." "The feeling is mutual," Pete replied. "Your daughter saved my life during a test flight gone wrong. Seems the Reeves family has a talent for pulling people out of impossible situations." A flicker of something, pride, perhaps, or recognition of a shared legacy, crossed James's face. "Just doing our jobs, Major. Nothing extraordinary about that." Pete's expression suggested he disagreed but knew better than to argue the point. "They're waiting inside. General Reynolds, Colonel Reynolds back then, spotted you through the window. He's been waiting for this moment for a long time." James took a deep breath, his hand briefly touching the purple heart pinned to his jacket. "Let's not keep them waiting any longer, then." As Pete led them into the bar's main room, conversations quieted. A group of men, ranging from their late 30s to early 60s, sat around a large corner table. In the center of the table, an empty chair had been placed, conspicuous in its solitary presence. General Marcus Reynolds stood as they approached, the bars and stars of his dress uniform reflecting the bar's subdued lighting. Despite the passage of years and the advancement in rank, Olivia recognized him immediately from her commissioning ceremony. The same commanding presence, the same evaluative gaze that now fixed on her father with an intensity that seemed to compress the air in the room. "Sergeant Reeves," Reynolds said, his voice carrying the weight of 13 years of waiting. "Welcome home." The simple greeting broke something open in the atmosphere. The men around the table rose as one, forming a semicircle around James's wheelchair. Olivia stepped back, recognizing that this moment belonged to her father and the men whose lives had intersected with his on a battlefield half a world and a lifetime away. One by one, they introduced themselves, names that had been just stories to her but represented the tangible legacy of her father's choices. Captain Michael Conrad, Pete's older brother, now a lieutenant colonel with his own command. Staff Sergeant David Martinez, who had been the communications specialist for Reynolds' team. Lieutenant Jack Wilson, a fresh-faced officer in 2012, now a major with gray at his temples and a prosthetic arm that spoke of other battles, other sacrifices. 11 men who had walked out of that valley in Afghanistan because her father had made a choice that nearly cost him his own life. 11 men who had gone on to lead other soldiers, protect other civilians, father children, and shape the world in ways large and small, all possible because of a split-second decision made under fire. "We've kept this seat empty for 13 years, Reynolds said, gesturing to the lone chair. "Every third Saturday in October, without fail. A reminder of unfinished business and unpaid debts." Her father's expression remained composed, but Olivia saw his hands tighten slightly on the ceremonial sword across his lap. "No debts between soldiers doing their duty, General." "Perhaps not," Reynolds acknowledged, "but there are debts between men who share the bond of combat. Debts of memory, of honor, of truth told without embellishment or false modesty." He turned to address the gathered men. "Most of you know that Sergeant Reeves' daughter has joined the Air Force as an engineering officer. What you may not know is that she's currently assigned to a project that directly impacts our national security, a project that several of you have connections to through various channels." Olivia felt the men's attention shift to her momentarily, assessing her with the same precision they might evaluate a tactical situation. "The Aurora Project," Michael Conrad said, nodding. "Pete told me you're making quite a name for yourself there, Lieutenant." "Just doing my job, sir," Olivia replied, echoing her father's earlier sentiment. This earned her a round of knowing smiles from the veterans. James Reeves cleared his throat, drawing attention back to himself. "I didn't come here to discuss my daughter's career, impressive as it may be. I came because after 13 years it seemed time to face the past rather than run from it." Reynolds nodded, gesturing toward a private room at the back of the bar. Then, let's move somewhere we can speak freely. Some conversations aren't meant for public spaces. The group relocated to a small function room where photographs of military units from various eras lined the walls. A fireplace cast warmth and flickering light across the gathered faces, softening the lines of age and experience that marked them. Olivia noticed her father studying these faces with the careful attention he applied to everything, perhaps seeing reflections of his own journey and the documented history of service and sacrifice. 13 years ago, Reynolds began, once they were settled, we walked into an ambush that should have ended all our lives. The intelligence was bad, the terrain worked against us, and the enemy had every advantage. He paused, his gaze fixing on James. Every advantage except one. They didn't account for a reconnaissance sergeant who refused to follow the safe course of action. Martinez, the former communications specialist, leaned forward. I was the one who received your first transmission, Sergeant. When you reported that you were initiating an attack on the enemy's flank, I thought you'd lost your mind. 6 men against what we estimated as 30+ hostiles in reinforced positions. 27. James corrected quietly. We had counted 27 combatants before we engaged. The additional forces arrived afterward. The precision of his memory after 13 years sent a ripple of reaction through the room. These men had lived with their recollections of that day, but hearing details from the perspective of the man who had changed the course of the battle brought a new dimension to their shared history.